Reflective endorsement. Now, on page 3, Korsgaard's explanation of reflective endorsement, I think, is a little bit tricky. It's maybe the least helpful of the 3. So just work through very carefully what she says here. I've kind of paraphrased what Korsgaard's saying. The reflective endorsement position is that a moral claim is normative, so obligatory, if we have a good reason to accept the claims of our moral nature. So the question is not, are these claims true, as it is for the realist? The reasons sought here are practical reasons. The idea is to show that morality is good for us. So let's start with this idea of our moral nature. Now, it makes it sound like we're sort of hardwired to believe certain things are right and certain things are wrong. And again, that may or may not be true. But the more important point, and we already saw it with voluntarism, even if by nature you are hardwired to believe that certain things are right, that doesn't mean you should do them, right? Why are they obligations? Why should you do whatever the right thing to do is? So the philosopher's first job, she writes on page 3, is to explain what the source of morality in human nature is, why we use moral concepts, and why we feel ourselves bound by them. So you might discover rooted in human psychology or human biology, or maybe in the evolution of human society, rules that we do tend to offer up. But just finding these rules isn't enough to make them obligations, right? Okay, we do tend to think that this is right. We do tend to think that's wrong. Why should we do the right thing? Well, here's the trick with reflective endorsement. The idea is then to show that those are good for us. So here is what we tend to believe is the right thing, and it's good for us to act that way. First and foremost, this isn't a matter of deciding that we simply like a certain way of behaving or that we like a certain set of rules. The first goal here is to show that certain ways of behaving really are good for us. And then, of course, that recognition that something is good for us, that's where the obligation comes from. So again, the obligation doesn't come from deciding that I want to act that way or even wanting to act that way. This is not rooting it in desire. The endorsement here is simply a recognition of a certain kind of fact, that certain ways of behaving really are good for us and that certain ways of behaving really aren't. And in reflecting upon that behavior and coming to endorse that, what really this answer is saying is that we sort of recognize our obligations through our endorsement of certain ways of behaving that are good for us. Now, you'll notice that Korsgaard does not spend a whole lot of time criticizing reflective endorsement as an answer. She will get into a bit of that in the second lecture, the lecture I'm not having you read. We will return to her thoughts on reflective endorsement and the appeal to autonomy near the end of the semester. But in the meantime, I just want to hold open reflective endorsement as one of the kinds of answers, one of the ways of answering the normative question this semester, so that we can sort of see how this might play out. The other major answer, and you will discover at the end of the semester, really Korsgaard's own answer is a version of this, is what she calls the appeal to autonomy. And the appeal to autonomy as an answer to the normative question says that the source of the normativity of moral claims, so the source of their being obligations, must be found in the agent's own will. In particular, in the fact that the laws of morality are the laws of the agent's own will, and that its claims are the ones she is prepared to make on herself. The capacity for self-conscious reflection about our own actions confers on us a kind of authority over ourselves, and it is this authority that gives normativity to moral claims. Now, that's a technical explanation. That's kind of a complicated explanation, in particular because here Korsgaard is drawing on a terminology you may not be familiar with. So let's just begin with this term autonomy, the sort of central idea, central concept here. Autonomy is a compound word coming from Greek roots. So the Greek roots here are autos and nomos. Autos means self. So of course, an automobile moves itself. An autoimmune disease is where the immune system attacks itself. So putting auto on the beginning of a word as the prefix to a word makes that word reflexive. It shows that it's doing something to itself. Now, in this case, what we are doing to ourselves is nomos, which is the Greek noun meaning law or rule. So, in this case, autonomy is self-rule, the ability to give yourself commands, the ability to rule over yourself. So this is what Korsgaard means when she says that our capacity for self-conscious reflection confers on us a kind of authority over ourselves. This authority we have over ourselves, the ability to make decisions, is autonomy. And so, of course, the appeal to autonomy says that obligation can only come from your ability to obligate yourself, so that the obligations you have are ultimately the obligations you give yourself. So, of course, as a way of answering the normative question about ethics, then, the challenge there will be to show that you obligate yourself to behave in certain moral ways. How and why you do that, well, that's gonna have to be sort of part of the project. But these then are, as Korsgaard puts it, the 4 different types of answer to the normative question. And so again, the first 2, voluntarism and realism, Korsgaard sees as deeply flawed. We're going to try to sort of get away from those answers this semester. We're going to try to challenge those answers when they pop up. But in the meantime, we really then want to see how these other answers might work. Sort of think about where the obligation to be moral comes from. Again, morality is not simply a description of how you behave. It's making claims on you. It's saying you ought to do the right thing. So why? Well, as we work our way through Aristotle and Kant, I want you to keep these answers in mind, keep these types of answers in mind, so that you can start to see how Aristotle and Kant answer these questions. And now they're not going to answer them explicitly. They're not going to come right out and say it. You're going to have to be on the lookout for how they would answer the question based on what they have said. So keep this in mind then as you start to read Aristotle next. Because of course, as you're working through Aristotle, I think based on what he says, you should start to see where he thinks the obligation to be moral actually comes from.